A child is dying, but the only person who can save him is handcuffed in the middle of the street by police because he is black. This is not a movie. This is real. Elijah Cross, an emergency room doctor, is rushing to the hospital in the rain to save the mayor's nephew. He has less than 10 minutes, but he never makes it because 2 white cops stop him, accuse him of a crime, and put him in a patrol car despite his pleas that a child is waiting for him to survive. The only reason? He is black and they think he is lying. Little do they know. The man they just humiliated is the man who will expose the entire corrupt, racist, and dishonest police system. The story you are about to hear will make you angry, cry, and unable to look away. If you believe justice should not have skin color, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us bring light to places still in darkness. That night, Newford did not sleep. The cobblestone streets were drenched in a downpour. The streetlights were blurred in the water that rolled down from the eaves, and the storm seemed to bring more than just thunder. It brought something heavier, more urgent. In a beat-up old medical van, Dr. Elijah Cross, 39, was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. His eyes, deep and urgent, occasionally glanced at the screen of his phone, which was pulsing with warnings. A text message kept repeating. Isaac Ward, Stage 4 anaphylaxis, critical, priority 1. Dr. E. Cross must be available. The words were no longer words. They were the beating of his heart. The reason he was driving as if his soul were on fire. No one in this city, not even the regular ambulance crew, could handle an emergency of this magnitude. Isaac, just 7 years old, the eldest grandson of Mayor Caroline Ward, collapsed in the middle of a lavish private gala at a lakeside mansion. A piece of cake with traces of almonds was enough to make the boy stop breathing and convulse. The doctors on duty called, but only one name was mentioned repeatedly like a cry for help: Elijah Cross. He was one of the few young doctors who had served overseas. He knew more than theory. He had saved lives amid bombs and bloodshed, where there were no tools, no time to hesitate. And this time, the lifesaver was not in the barracks. He was lying on a hospital bed, and the seconds were ticking down. The wind whipped against the windshield. The rain pounded down as if it wanted to swallow the car. The clock on the dashboard jumped to 11:47 p.m. Elijah told himself, "If everything goes well, I have about 13 minutes, no more." Every turn in the old town was a nerve-wracking experience. He had to concentrate. He couldn't slip, but he couldn't slow down either. No night in his career had been as intense as tonight. Not because he was the mayor's nephew, but because Elijah knew that this boy, just a kid, had never done anything wrong to deserve death for a moment's delay. The lights on both sides of the old houses were yellow, reflecting through the rain like stray lanterns. The poetic scene, on any other night, might have moved people, but at this moment, it was like the scene of an approaching tragedy, slow but unstoppable. Elijah swerved to avoid a truck blocking the way, almost hitting a lamppost. Sweat poured down his forehead, mixing with the cold rain. He muttered, "Please, please, everyone, don't slow down like it's Sunday morning." Ahead, a line of cars snaked slowly across the intersection. The light was red. No police were directing traffic. No one understood that every second here was a step closer to death for a tiny life. Elijah gripped the steering wheel. His heart pounded in his chest. The image of Isaac, a boy he had never seen before, flashed through his mind, the boy twitching, his eyes unfocused, his mouth trying to catch his last breath. Those eyes haunted him more than anything. The traffic light was still red. His mind screamed. He couldn't wait any longer. Elijah glanced to the side. An empty alley. No traffic. He knew this was a violation. He knew that if there were cameras, if there were police, he could get a ticket. But then he thought, if a child died because he was afraid of a ticket, would he still be worthy of being called a doctor? He shifted the gear, stepped on the gas. The car sped through the intersection. The tires screeched, water splashing onto the pavement. The car behind him honked angrily, but Elijah didn't care. He didn't have time to care. In the rearview mirror, he saw his own face. Wet, strained, eyes steely. This wasn't a normal night on duty. He knew it with every fiber of his being. The phone rang. It was from the hospital. He picked it up, his hand shaking. "Dr. Cross, where are you?" The nurse's voice was panicked. "The boy is losing oxygen completely. His heart is unstable." Elijah took a breath, trying to calm himself. "I'm on my way. Tell them to get OR2 ready. I need the intubation kit ready. 10 more minutes." He hung up, tossed the phone into the passenger seat, stepped on the gas harder. The car roared into the rain. But then, beep! Red and blue lights exploded in the rearview mirror. Elijah saw the police lights, and in that moment his heart sank like a stone falling into the ocean. No, not now. Elijah took a deep breath, but the air didn't fill his chest. He'd heard hundreds of stories. Friends, colleagues, former patients. People of color pulled over in the middle of the night, asked for papers, harassed because they didn't look the right type to drive through a wealthy neighborhood in the middle of the night. But he'd never thought it would happen now, on this night, when every beat of a child's heart depended on every minute he saved. He did a quick calculation in his head. If he stopped now, if the check took only 5 minutes, then maybe Isaac. He didn't dare think about it. His hand shook slightly on the gear shift. Part of him wanted to speed up, to let it all go, but reason held him back. He knew a black man who ran from the police would never be seen as a doctor, never explained. Just a short headline in tomorrow's paper. Black man shot running from police, and Isaac wouldn't have anyone at the hospital. Elijah pulled slowly to the side of the road. The car lurched as the front wheels plunged into a puddle as deep as a ditch. He carefully turned off the engine, turned on the overhead lights, rolled down the windows, and placed both hands on the wheel, palms open. This wasn't a technique taught in medical school. This was survival. Rain poured in through the windows, cold. His shirt sleeves were soaked, clinging to his skin. In his palm, his pulse was pounding like a drum. A dark figure appeared beside the car. Heavy police boots thudded into the puddle, making a sloshing sound that seemed to go on forever. Elijah didn't turn, but he could see. A burly figure, a shiny raincoat, suspicious eyes hidden behind the glare of the headlights. The police. A voice rang out, dry and friendly. Driver's license and registration. Elijah tried to keep his voice calm, gentle but urgent. "Officer, I'm Dr. Elijah Cross. I'm on my way to Memorial Hospital. There's a child dying from a severe anaphylactic reaction. I'm the only one who can save him." He was telling the truth. Every word was the truth. But the officer just tilted his head, his eyes cold and unchanging. "You just ran a red light. That's dangerous driving." Elijah felt his heart pounding against his ribs. He swallowed, not daring to speak too loudly, not daring to speak too softly. "I understand, but I'd like you to check with the command post or call the hospital. They'll confirm. The boy's name is Isaac Ward, Mayor Caroline's nephew. I'm not lying. Driver's license and registration." The officer repeated, this time more sharply. No questions, no promise of checking. Elijah understood. This was no longer about traffic laws. This was about power. It was a predetermined look. A black man in the middle of a rainy night, lying to get out of trouble. He slowly opened the glove box, his hands moving slowly, as if each movement could trigger a deadly reaction. He pulled out his license, the registration, and handed it over with shaking hands. The rain continued. Water from the roof dripped onto the hood in a continuous murmur. The cop snatched the papers, said nothing, turned, and headed straight for the patrol car. Elijah watched, eyes straining, as if to see through the rain, counting the steps he took to return. But he didn't. He was alone, in the rain. The clock on the dashboard jumped to 11:50 p.m. Isaac had about 7-8 minutes left. Every minute that passed felt like a drop of blood draining from his body. Elijah clenched his teeth. His cheeks clenched so tightly that his jaw almost froze. There had been times in his life when he had fought to keep a wounded soldier alive in the middle of a war zone. But never had he felt so completely stripped away, because here his opponent was not death. It was arrogance, indifference, and a system that used skin color as a weapon. No, not now, not tonight. Elijah Cross gritted his teeth, the red-green lights swirling in his rearview mirror like a waking nightmare. He had seen people pulled from cars in the middle of the night, questioned, beaten down for attitude, for not cooperating, for being black in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he had never thought it would be him, on his way to save a dying child. Elijah hesitated, his hands still on the wheel. His instincts told him, step on the gas, disappear. But his reason told him there was no turning back for a black man running from the police in the middle of the night. Not as a doctor, not with Isaac Ward fighting for his breath at Memorial. He turned on the overhead lights, turned off the car, slowly rolled down the windows, and placed his wet, open hands on the wheel. It was still raining, burning, cold. The weight of the sky pressed down on the roof. Water poured in through the windows, flowing over his elbows like melting ice. But Elijah felt nothing but the sound of his own heart, racing against the death of a child he had never met. The sound of footsteps pounding in puddles echoed behind him. No rush, no hurry. Power did not need to be rushed. A figure appeared at the driver's window, a police officer. White, tall. The first impression was not of professionalism, but of suppressed disdain behind the dull eyes, his face as if accustomed to not asking questions. License and registration, he said. No introduction, no questioning question, just a bare, unvarnished command. Elijah swallowed. His voice was both calm and urgent. Officer, this is Dr. Elijah Cross. I'm on my way to Memorial Hospital. There's a child, Mayor Carolyn Ward's nephew, in stage 4 anaphylaxis. They need me now. This is a life-or-death situation. I'm the only one. A red light is a red light, the officer interrupted. You ran it, so you're in violation. He didn't even glance at Elijah, let alone ask any more questions. He just repeated his request, his voice sharper. I'm not asking why, I'm asking for paperwork. The answer was colder than the rain. Elijah's hand trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anger. A child was waiting for him to save. A city had sent him away. And the man before him, empowered to save lives, was losing precious seconds of his life because of a bruised ego. Slowly, Elijah opened the glove box. Every movement was slow motion, not for his sake, but because one wrong move, he could be immobile forever. He held out his license and registration. The officer took it without another word. Then he turned and walked toward the patrol car as if he'd just caught a criminal trying to make a cheap excuse. Elijah didn't scream, didn't plead, just sat there, soaked to the core. He checked his watch, 11:52 p.m. Damn. He didn't have much time. The police car radio crackled somewhere behind him. He couldn't make out what it was, but from the way the officer paused on the call, then nodded. He knew. They weren't calling the hospital. They weren't calling the dispatcher. They were calling for backup, and sure enough, less than a minute later, a second patrol car rolled up. Lights flashing, siren blaring over the rain. Elijah cursed under his breath. Each police car that arrived was another wall. Not to protect little Isaac, but to protect the power of those who had wronged him. A young officer stepped out, thinner. His face still held the youthfulness of a rookie. Elijah saw the hesitation in his eyes, and that, though small, gave him hope. The older officer, Elijah later learned his name was Lieutenant Paul Remick, nodded toward Elijah. Get out of the car, Elijah lowered his voice. Please, just call Memorial. Check my name. They're expecting me. There might be paperwork, a notice from the mayor. No, get out of the car now! The man's voice cut like a knife. Elijah looked into his eyes and realized a chilling truth. He knew he was telling the truth, but he didn't care. Slowly, Elijah opened the door and stepped out into the street. The water was ankle deep. The rain hit his face like a whip. He raised his hands instinctively. Remick said nothing, just pulled the cuffs. Clink. The metal tightened around his wrists like a sentence. "You're arresting a doctor on the way to save a life," Elijah said. No pleading, no protesting. Just the truth. Remick leaned closer, a sneer curving the corners of his mouth. "You're not the first to say that." Elijah was pushed into the back seat of the squad car. The door slammed shut. Everything outside seemed distant. Flashing lights, rain pounding on the roof, the radio crackling in the storm. But in his head, there was only one sound. The ventilator, fading away. Isaac's breathing, fading. His life, slipping away because a man in uniform refused to listen. The back seat of the squad car was a small, cramped, cold box. It smelled of old plastic, of damp rain, and of helplessness. Elijah sat there, his back against the glass, his hands cuffed behind him. His wet shirt clung to his skin, and every time he tried to move, the cuffs tightened further on his wrists. On the dashboard in front of him, Lieutenant Remick was smirking at the young cop, Tyler Briggs. "You see, these guys are smart now. They pretend to be doctors, journalists, someone important. For what? To get away from the law. But here, in Savannah, we don't let anyone get away with it." Briggs didn't answer. He looked at Elijah in the rearview mirror. Just a glance, but Elijah caught it. Hesitant, conscience-stricken. He blinked slowly, then leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Call Memorial. I'm Dr. Elijah Cross. They'll confirm. Patient name is Isaac Ward, Mayor Caroline Ward's nephew. I'm the one taking the case." Briggs blinked. His mouth moved, but Remick slammed his hand on the control panel. "Shut up. I don't need anyone lecturing me in the middle of the night. We're on duty. And while you're on duty, a child is suffocating," Elijah hissed through gritted teeth, his breath coming in gasps of anger and helplessness. "And no one but me, can save him." Remick spun around, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "You see, Briggs," he growled. "Another eloquent speaker, a doctor who thinks he's above the law." Briggs looked away, but the way he gripped the wheel, the way his lips quivered slightly, it all said one thing. His confidence was wavering. Suddenly, the police car's radio crackled, staticky for a moment before a female voice came on, urgent and panicked. "All units, urgent clearance. Memorial Hospital requests emergency transport for Dr. Elijah Cross. Patient Isaac Ward, 8, in critical condition. Request immediate medical escort, top priority." The interior of the car froze. Briggs turned his head to look at Elijah. His eyes were wide, as if he had just witnessed an explosion. Remick said nothing. He just clenched his jaw, his eyes moving, fast and fierce, like an animal backed up against a wall. Elijah gasped, his eyes burning. "Is there anything else you need clearance for?" Briggs hesitated. His hand reached for the radio, about to press the redial button to confirm. Remick slapped the radio, wrenching it from his partner's hand. "What the hell, Briggs? Don't let him control you." Briggs backed away. "Electrifund. We just got a confirmation from the operator, Lieutenant. If that boy is real, and if he's a doctor," Elijah cut in, his voice like a knife cutting through the rain. "You know I'm telling the truth. Now you decide. Are you going to be the one to bring me in to save a life, or the one sitting next to the guy who let a child die while protecting his ego?" Briggs pulled out the handcuff keys. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were clearer. Remick raised his hand to stop him. "Stop. This is my order. You're not taking the handcuffs off." Briggs looked straight at Remick, not bowing his head for the first time. "And what if the kid dies, sir? He's the mayor's nephew." He glanced at Elijah. "And he's the doctor on file. I don't want that kid's blood on my hands." Click. The cuffs snapped open. Elijah tightened his grip on his wrists, the cuffs imprinting red skin. But he didn't complain. He didn't look at anyone. He just opened the door and rushed out into the rain like a cannon. The storm was rising, but he didn't care. He had to get to the hospital, not for the mayor, not for honor, but for a dying kid. And now there was no one standing between him and death. Except him. The rain was raging, howling down Savannah. The red and blue lights of the patrol car swirled across the wet pavement like blood. Elijah Cross shot out of the car like an arrow tearing through the air, his legs skidding through ankle-deep puddles, but he didn't slow down. He couldn't slow down. A young officer, Briggs, rushed after him, opening the patrol car door and shouting, "Get in, I'm taking you to the hospital!" Without a moment's hesitation, Elijah threw himself into the front seat, slamming the door shut. "Memorial emergency, full throttle, don't stop." Briggs slammed on the gas, the car screeching, the water swirling beneath the wheels exploding. The police lights swept across the empty streets, shooting straight through each slippery curve as if the city were receding behind him. Inside the car, Elijah sat stiffly. His eyes were wide, his hands gripping the door handles until his knuckles were white. His head wasn't in the car. He was in the ER. In the ICU bed where Isaac Ward, 8 years old, skinny, tiny, was fighting for his life. The heart monitor was fading. The breathing tube wasn't getting enough oxygen. His trachea was swelling by the minute. A team of doctors, scared, confused, waiting for him. Briggs turned. His eyes were bloodshot. "Do you think he'll make it?" Elijah didn't answer. He just closed his eyes. Then he said softly, "If we're too late, he'll die. And that death will be a stain on both of us for the rest of our lives." The car lurched forward as it slammed on the emergency door. Elijah opened the door before it had even stopped. He drove straight through the sliding glass door, a storm that swept away all rules. In the white-lit hallway, the sound of wet boots hitting the tile floor was like the pounding drums of war. A nurse saw him, panicked. "Trauma room 3, the boy's heart is stopping." Elijah turned sharply, rushing into the open room. A small bed, a small body. Too small. Isaac lay there like a fragile doll, pale, eyes closed, mouth open in a gasp for air. The heart monitor was red, his numbers dropping rapidly. A flat line began to crawl across the monitor screen. A long, cold scream, a knife through the chest of time. A nurse shouted, "Clear!" Electric shock. Isaac jerked, then fell. Helpless, Elijah kicked the chair away, lunging for the bed. "I'm taking over. Epi 1 milligram, intubate. Prepare to open the trachea if that fails." No time for textbooks, no time for procedures. Just instinct, and his screaming heart. He squeezed the needle, jabbing it straight into Isaac's thigh. His left hand held the boy's head, his right hand pushed the endotracheal tube, but his throat was swollen to the point of suffocation. Scalpel. A nurse pushed the tracheostomy toward him. Elijah wasn't wearing goggles. There was no need. His hands opened the incision as quickly as tearing paper. Blood poured out, but he didn't stop. 1 stroke, 2 strokes. The tube was pushed in. "Bag him!" The nurse attached the breathing bag. Elijah tightened the tube, squeezed once. 1 second, no response. The second. Beep! Beep, beep, beep. The screen flashed. The heartbeat returned. Fragile, but real. The room was strangely silent. A young doctor slumped into a chair, tears streaming down his face. A nurse covered her face. Someone whispered, "He's alive." Elijah stepped back, shaking, his whole body wet as if he'd been reborn. He looked at Isaac, at the small chest that was contracting with the machine, breathing again, coming back to life. He had pulled the boy back from death. He was in time. He stepped into the hallway. She stood there, Mayor Caroline Ward. No longer a politician, just a grandmother. Her face was pale, her hair matted with rain. Her red eyes found him, and then filled with tears as if the whole city had just cried. Elijah didn't need to say anything. She collapsed into a chair. The world seemed to stop. Elijah didn't smile. No thanks. No triumph, because he knew the child was alive. But the fact that he had just been saved was a greater threat than death. He, the black doctor who had just been nearly killed by a traffic stop, had survived. And he carried with him the evidence that the system had nearly killed a child to protect its ego. The storm had just stopped, but the real battle had just begun. The emergency room was quiet now. The machines continued to beep, but no longer alarms, but life. Elijah stood there, soaked, sweat mixed with rain, his hands stained with the blood of a child who had just escaped death. But his eyes, there was no joy. There was no victory here, only a price. Isaac Ward, the mayor's nephew, was still alive. But he almost wasn't. And not because of an accident, nor because of medical failure, but because two police officers had chosen power over reason, ego over life. Because they saw a black man behind the wheel, and that was enough to raise suspicion. Elijah walked out of the emergency room, leaving behind the sound of the ventilator, the nurses' whispers, the grateful gazes. Outside in the hospital hallway, Mayor Caroline Ward sat there, clutching the strap of her bag, her eyes brimming with tears. When she saw Elijah, she stood up. "He's alive?" Elijah nodded slightly. She gasped, half collapsing. "Thank God," she whispered. "And thank you." Elijah didn't reply. There were no words in his heart that were right enough. No, I'm glad. No, it's okay. Because it wasn't okay. He had just saved a life. But he knew. On the way there, he had lost something that would never be regained. His belief in justice, in order, in why he had chosen medicine. Elijah turned away. He walked slowly, down the long hospital hallway, where the fluorescent lights dimmed the bright white floors. Each step brought back images he didn't want to remember. Officer Remick's contemptuous look, his hands cuffed behind his back, his voice choked in his throat as he begged for a chance to save someone. He stopped in a corner of the hallway, leaning against the wall. His chest was heaving. Not from fatigue. From anger. The emotion that was bubbling under his skin, like lava waiting to erupt. He thought of those who hadn't been as lucky. No doctor title, no mayor he knew, no one to vouch for them. They'd been dragged from their cars, beaten, shot. Not even an apology. Didn't survive. "Are you okay?" A voice came from behind him. Elijah turned. It was Briggs, the young cop who'd uncuffed him, who'd brought him here. Briggs stood like a lost child. His eyes were scared, but also quietly grateful. "I don't know what to say, but thank you for not giving up." Elijah looked him straight in the eye. "And you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Do you understand what just happened?" Briggs bowed his head. "I think I'm beginning to understand." Elijah's lips twitched, not a smile, just a sad, silent slit. "That's the problem. You're just starting. But I've been living with it all my life." They were silent. Then Briggs spoke. "Lieutenant Remick, I don't think he'll let it go. And my superiors if they find out I've taken the handcuffs off." Elijah interrupted, his voice low. "You did the right thing. But the right thing isn't always the safest thing. Remember that." At the end of the hall, a nurse ran toward them, stammering, "The mayor is looking for you. Someone from the police department just arrived." Elijah turned away. He wasn't surprised. No wonder people came not to award medals, but to ask questions. Not to apologize, but to silence. Not to repent, but to whitewash. Because truth, especially a truth that has survived death, is the most dangerous thing to those in power who lack conscience. And Elijah knew. He had entered the land of storms. He took a deep breath, straightened his blouse, wiped the dried blood from his hands, and walked toward the intersection where power, truth, and silence waited for him to decide who he was. He did not turn back. He did not need to, because behind him was a living child. And before him was a system trembling because, for the first time, it could not control a black man who dared to say no. As Elijah entered the hospital lobby, he sensed a change in the atmosphere. Gone was the chaos of the emergency room. Gone were the tears of loved ones, or the gasps of hope. Now there was a different kind of silence, cold, dry, and suggestive. 3 men stood by the reception desk. 2 were in police uniforms. The third was in civilian clothes, but his every move carried an old authority and the smell of dirty politics. The face was familiar. Elijah had seen it in photos. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell Warren, Savannah's deputy chief of police, the trusted hand of those who sat higher, deeper, more hidden. He turned as soon as Elijah appeared. "Dr. Cross," Warren said, as if inviting him to tea. "We need you to come with us. There are some things that need to be cleared up." Elijah stopped in the middle of the lobby. The chill from the stone floor crept up his spine like a reminder. They weren't there to listen. They were there to control. He didn't answer. He just lifted his chin slightly, as if weighing every molecule of air around him. "What needs to be clarified?" he asked, his voice calm. "I just saved the life of a child you almost killed with your arrogance." One of the officers moved forward, ready to press, but Elijah raised his hand. No resistance, just straightened his back. Warren kept his fake, polite smile. "We have reports that you resisted law enforcement, that you refused to comply when stopped, that you were a danger on a public road, and that you may have been using unlicensed medical equipment." The hospital was crowded. Nurses, doctors, patients in wheelchairs, huddled family members, all were silent, but their eyes followed. Elijah looked straight at Warren, and this time he smiled. Not a kind smile. The smile of someone who knows all too well that the cards before him are fake, but is still cold enough to flip each card. "Unlicensed equipment? You mean the tracheostomy kit I used to keep Isaac Ward alive?" Elijah snarled. "Or are you talking about my arm?" Warren frowned. Elijah took a step forward. "I came to the hospital in handcuffs, wet from the rain, shivering from the cold. I didn't ask anyone to believe me. I just asked to do what I was born to do, save lives. And because I don't have the skin color you trust, a child almost died." At this point, the first phones were pulled out. A young nurse was recording a video. A resident was pulling out a laptop. A patient was pulling out an old phone, slowly but surely. "You're making things worse for yourself," Warren growled. "We're going to hold you for questioning." Elijah crossed his arms. "I'm not going anywhere. If you want to arrest me, you'll have to do it in front of this entire hospital. In front of the cameras, in front of the mayor, in front of the media." Warren's eyes widened. It was as if he had just realized. This was no longer a crackdown in the dark. This was the light. Elijah moved closer, his voice low. "Warren, who do you think I am? Someone who backs down when threatened? Someone who apologizes for not dying peacefully on a wet street tonight?" Warren didn't answer, but his shoulders tensed, his fists clenched. The lobby door swung open. Mayor Caroline Ward walked in. There were no more tears. There was only the coldness of someone who had just lost a grandchild, to the very system she had once trusted. She walked straight at Warren, her eyes steely. "If you touch Dr. Elijah Cross again, I will personally call the entire local press, and I will make it clear. My son lives because of a man you almost killed." Warren turned away, but his lips pressed together as if he were swallowing air. "You're making a mess of things," he hissed. The mayor simply said, "No, I'm drawing a line between right and wrong." The ceiling lights blazed. The phones were still spinning. Elijah stood in the middle of the circle. His eyes were no longer bewildered, no longer angry, only absolute alertness, because he knew this war had only just begun. And this time, he wasn't alone. After Warren left, the hospital hallways were still tense. No one said anything, but everyone looked at Elijah and Caroline as if they had just witnessed something unbelievable. A black man daring to challenge the system, and a politician daring to stand up for truth. Caroline turned to Elijah. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. "We don't have much time. They'll be back. And next time, it won't just be with threats." Elijah nodded. They both turned, walking toward the elevator, silently but firmly. On the 5th floor of the hospital, Caroline led Elijah into a small conference room that was usually used for internal meetings. The door closed, and the outside world seemed to go silent. She put her bag down on the table, pulling out a thin, densely packed document. Elijah knew without asking that it wasn't medical paperwork. "Starting last week," Caroline said, "I started getting calls from some of my regular donors. They were hinting that I should quietly address the complaints about the city police. And if I didn't, I might not have the backing for my re-election." She paused. "I thought they were talking nonsense. I don't think so anymore." Elijah picked up the file. Cold numbers. Unexplained funding from private security firms. Millions of dollars in equipment contracts. And right there in the middle of the 4th page, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell Warren's signature. "They're laundering money from the city budget," Elijah whispered, "and keeping loyal officers from being investigated, from being prosecuted." She pointed to the corner of the stack. "Elijah, if you speak up, they will crush you. Not just your license. They will frame you. They will send people after your family. You will have nothing." "Will?" Elijah put down the papers. He looked into her eyes. No blame, no plea. Just a cold stare, burning like a torch in a storm. "I understand. But you know, if I stay silent, I will never be me again." Caroline sat down. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her words were firm. "I will hold a press conference." Elijah frowned. "Tonight," she continued, "before they can erase the data, clean up the scene, deny responsibility. I can get some independent reporters, but I need you there. I need you to tell me everything." Elijah stood still for a moment. He thought of Isaac, the child sleeping soundly, the breathing tube flickering as if his life was hanging by a thread. He thought of the handcuffs, of Remick's voice, of the helplessness of time as it died under the suspicious gazes of his skin. "You'll lose everything," Elijah said. "They'll come after you before me." Caroline curled her lip. "That boy is my nephew. But you're the one who kept him alive. I've lied for too long to get to this mayor's office. It's time to stand up for what's right." He nodded. And in that moment, two people so different from the very foundations of society, a doctor and a politician, one crushed by the system and one who had been part of it, became allies. There was no turning back. There was only the truth. And the storm. Not far away, in a dimly lit office building, Lieutenant Colonel Warren slammed his fist down on the oak desk. "They're holding a press conference?" He gritted his teeth, his eyes darting around the room filled with 6 other people, all powerful figures in the city. The police chief, a representative of the city council, a real estate mogul, and a hunched-over lawyer with a briefcase full of screens. "I want the recordings of Cross and the hospital. I want the patrol car cameras. And if there's anything unflattering, delete it. Delete it. Don't let any of it get out." One spoke up, hesitating. "If we try to silence them, the press will..." "The press will eat us," Warren interrupted. "But if he talks first, if the mayor stands with him..." He didn't need to continue. The shadow of violence and abuse that the city had been hiding from for years would burst open. Warren looked at each person in the room, his voice cracking. "We have one night to put out that fire." At the same time, Elijah walked out of the hospital, still raining lightly. The raindrops were cold, but he did not shiver. In his hand was the mayor's file. On his chest was Isaac's dried blood. And in his heart, for the first time in years, he was no longer afraid. The grand hall of Savannah City Hall had never been as tense as it was that night. 3 microphones were mounted in front of the podium. Behind them was a backdrop of the state flag and the city's coat of arms. In the courtyard, dozens of reporters held tape recorders, cameras, and even phones. Outside the building, hundreds of people began to gather, holding umbrellas in the cold drizzle, their faces pensive, their eyes shining with something they had never seen before: hope. Elijah stood behind the stage. His eyes were half closed, silently replaying each moment. The sound of handcuffs, the mechanical heartbeat, Remick's blank gaze, and the tiny figure of Isaac in the hospital bed. Tonight was not just about him. Tonight was about everyone who had been silenced, who had been abandoned, who had been forgotten. Caroline Ward stepped up to him, nodding. "Here we go." Spotlights flashed on the stage. Cameras moved. Live television came on. Mayor Caroline stepped forward, her stride firm, her eyes blazing like knives in a storm. The whispers died as she began. "Tonight," she said, "I do not stand here as a mayor. I stand here as a grandmother, someone who almost lost her grandchild, not because of lack of medicine, not because of an accident, but because of the arrogance, prejudice, and abuse of power of the very people who were supposed to protect us." The shutters blared. She continued, unshaken. "Isaac Ward, 8 years old, was saved by a doctor, a man the system tried to shut out, tried to stifle, because of the color of his skin." Then she stepped back, and Elijah stepped forward. The lights were focused, like sunlight on one man. He had no paper. He needed no script. "None of us are born heroes," Elijah said, his voice even and clear as a heartbeat. "Neither am I. I am just a doctor who has sworn to save anyone who needs me, no matter the circumstances." He paused, looking straight into the camera. "But that night I was pulled over for nothing. I was treated like a criminal for one reason only. I was a black man running in the rain to save a life." The audience began to nod, hands clenched. Elijah lifted the file. "Here is the evidence. The dirty contracts, the shady payments, the familiar names." He handed the file to the press. "It's not just Remick. It's not just Warren. It's a system, a machine that swallows up anyone who says no." And then everything stopped. The door to the building opened. 3 men walked in, amid the murmuring crowd. One wore a black suit with an FBI badge. The other 2 were in plain clothes, their eyes cold as steel. Elijah looked at them, his eyes calm. He knew this was coming, but he didn't expect it to come so soon. One of them raised an order. "Elijah Cross, you are under federal investigation for leaking classified documents, manipulating the media, and violating professional ethics." The entire hall held its breath. The press turned their cameras. A reporter shouted, "What do you have to say?" Elijah raised his hand. He was not afraid. "I have only one thing. I have nothing to hide. But if telling the truth is a crime, then handcuff me right here, in the light, in front of millions of people watching." Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. No one dared to move. And then, a burst of applause from the last row. Then the room. The press turned. The people stood up, clapping loudly. The agent hesitated. Caroline stepped forward, blocking Elijah. "I signed a witness protection order for Dr. Cross 15 minutes ago. If you want to arrest him on national television, call the Justice Department." A poker, a flip. The room exploded. Elijah stood there, his heart still pounding, but not with fear, because he knew the truth had been told. And once it was told, it could never be buried again. There was no going back. No need, because the light, at last, was stronger than the darkness. The press conference ended in a sea of flashbulbs, applause, and stunned public opinion. The name Elijah Cross, from a doctor of obscurity, had become a symbol of suppressed truth, a symbol of courage in a dark system, and a target. When the cameras went dark, as the reporters hurried away to spread the news, Elijah remained standing on the stage. His heart was not pounding with fear. It was with awareness. "You know that?" Caroline moved closer to him, whispering, "We've just started a war. There's no going back." He turned to her, his voice low. "I know, but wars never begin with a shot. They begin with a silent refusal." That night, Elijah did not go home. He was placed in a suite on the top floor of the Liberty Tower Hotel, secretly guarded, unannounced. There was no turning back. Outside was the rain-soaked Savannah streets, but inside he felt the real ice, the undelivered threat, the mysterious gaze of a stranger in the lobby, the phone ringing in the middle of the night and then hanging up. The darkness wasn't necessarily the scariest thing. The silence was. He sat alone on the sofa, the TV off. His phone vibrated. A text message, sender unknown. "Do you think the light will protect you? Will your wife get home safe tonight?" Elijah gripped the phone. He didn't have a wife. They didn't know that, but they would find out. Soon. The next morning, the major networks ran the headlines. Doctor who saved mayor's nephew was stopped by racist cops. Mayor Ward calls for high-level investigation into Savannah police force. Leaked documents expose police system taking bribes, covering up wrongdoing. At the same time, a tidal wave of backlash came. Extremist forums spread rumors. Elijah Cross was a media actor, political operative, traitor in white. An anonymous article appeared in the Savannah Courier. Dr. Elijah was suspended for 3 days at Yale for conflict with colleague. Is he really safe for patients? A conservative blogger headlined, "Doctor disguised as doctor to attack cops. Who is funding Elijah Cross?" Caroline slammed the newspaper down on the table. "It's starting," she said. Elijah just nodded. They were using the oldest method of putting out a fire, throwing mud. That evening, Caroline received a strange email. No words, just a video file attached. She opened it. The initial image was blurry, shot from a hidden security camera. A black man was pulled from a car, pinned to the ground by 2 police officers. One of them was clearly Lieutenant Remick. A faint scream. "I wasn't fighting back. I was just going to get medicine for my daughter." A blow with a baton, a kick to the ribs. The man lay still. The video ended. No explanation. But there was a time code. 3 days ago, before Elijah. Caroline turned to Elijah, her voice almost hoarse. "Someone inside is sending us the pieces." Elijah narrowed his eyes. He whispered, "Someone inside the system wants it to collapse." And then, for the first time in days, he smiled, not in triumph, in hope. It started again, with an anonymous text. No greeting, no signature, no location. Just 3 words. D7 1 a.m. alone. Elijah stared at the screen of his phone. The message came from an anonymous device. Encrypted. Untraceable. Caroline stood behind him, frowning. "D7, I think?" He nodded. The underground level of the PD, where they store the raw cameras, internal logs, and unedited footage. She took a deep breath. "No one but the higher-ups get in there." Elijah didn't answer. There was only one question in his mind. Why would someone in the shadows want to lead him into the place where the most deadly secrets of the entire system were kept? It was exactly 1 a.m. The savannah sky was hazy, cold as metal. Elijah parked by a side entrance behind the police department building, where all the cameras had been removed to save money. He wore a hoodie, a mask, and in his pocket was the access card Caroline had secretly provided him, a secondary key from her time on the Internal Oversight Board. The metal door to D7 swung open, before he could even show it. In the darkness, a man waited, young, skinny, in a police uniform without a badge. His right hand trembled slightly. The overhead light revealed an aluminum name tag, Nguyen. Elijah squinted. "You sent the video?" The young officer nodded. "I'm Brady. Brady Nguyen. East Patrol. I can't keep quiet anymore." Room D7 was a small bunker, as cold as a well. 2 rows of steel lockers, a row of old monitors, and in the middle was the internal server, not connected to the internet, where everything the city didn't want to see was hidden. Brady didn't say much. He just opened it, pulled out a folder titled Redacted Incidents Remick Raw. Elijah sat down. He saw what he feared, and more. A video appeared. A black man was pinned to the floor of an interrogation room. An officer, apparently Remick, was holding him down, punching him in the face, cursing and laughing. Outside the one-way glass door, 2 other officers were watching, not intervening, not stopping, not reporting. Internal report says subject with prior arrest for resisting law enforcement. Case filed. No action required, Brady whispered, his eyes never leaving the screen. Elijah clenched his fists. What he saw was just the tip of the iceberg. "How many records are there?" he asked. Brady replied, 278. Over 40 people seriously injured, and at least 3 deaths listed as stress-induced cardiac arrest. Elijah stood up. The room was suddenly colder than the snow outside. "What do you want by sending me these?" Brady swallowed. His voice was small but firm. "I want them to pay. I want my accomplices to see their faces on television. I don't want to die in silence." He looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "Do you know that if you do this, you'll never be able to be a cop again?" Brady nodded. "It's better than living like a shadow." At 5 a.m. the next morning, Elijah and Caroline launched a plan they had never dreamed of, a massive data leak to an independent news outlet, the Sentinel, that had rocked 3 states with its investigative reporting on police brutality. In less than an hour, more than 40 gigabytes of encrypted video, audio, internal data, and witness statements were uploaded to an international server. In an attached email, Elijah wrote, "If I can't be there to verify this, let the facts speak for themselves. Don't let them twist it." That morning, in a dark corner of City Hall, Warren smashed his computer screen as he saw the Remick clip spreading like wildfire on social media. "They found D7!" he screamed. "They pulled out the destroyed files!" An assistant asked, his voice breaking. "Should we respond to the media?" Warren turned, eyes blazing. No, send a Z alert. Activate the information isolation protocol and find that rat in the ranks. At the same time, Elijah left the hotel, returning to the hospital to visit Isaac, who was still lying there, breathing softly through the machine. But this time, Elijah wasn't there just to heal. He was there to keep a promise to the boy, to Caroline, and to himself. Never again should anyone die for silence. That morning, when Elijah walked into the hospital hoping to see Isaac again in peace, he had no idea what was waiting for him. The glass doors opened automatically, and 3 men in gray suits, wearing federal insignia, stepped forward to block his path. "Dr. Elijah Cross?" one asked, his voice cold as steel. Elijah nodded. "We are here in response to an urgent summons from the Board of Professional Conduct. You are under investigation for disclosure of classified information, leakage of confidential information, and improper interference with medical procedures." Elijah paused. Not because he was surprised. They had come too quickly, too neatly, too precisely. The war had begun. And this was the first shot. Caroline sat alone in the press room at 9:00 a.m. In her hand was the latest news report from a local TV station that had once supported her and now turned against her. Mayor protects Savage. Did Carolyn Ward cover up Elijah Cross's misdeeds to save her career? Just below was a picture of her in tears as she stood by Isaac's hospital bed. Just so. A Foxline anchor said bluntly, "She used her grandson as a moral shield." Caroline threw the newspaper on the table, her head in her hands. Not out of fear. She knew this was coming. But she didn't expect it to be so fast, so cruel. That same afternoon, Elijah's phone rang repeatedly in the Savannah County Detention Center. Brady was gone. The Sheriff's Department's Internal Affairs team confirmed he had not appeared on any of the internal cameras after 10:42 a.m. The motel room was empty. The phone was left behind. The laptop was gone. The door had not been broken into, not a trace. Elijah didn't need to investigate to understand. Brady had been cleaned up. He sat silently in the cold cell, staring at the ceiling, dappled with light from the small window, pursed his lips as if swallowing the rage boiling inside him. The machine counterattacked faster, stronger, and dirtier than anything he had ever imagined. And then, a voice suddenly rang out in the prison hallway. "Take me to the interrogation room. I have information to discuss with the key witness." A man walked in. Elijah squinted, his heart pounding. No one else. Captain Marcus Harrow, former Savannah Police Department strategic advisor, one of the men who had orchestrated the file to erase Remick's traces, and the one who had directly confronted Caroline Ward last year during the suspension of the internal investigation. "Elijah Cross," Harrow said as the door closed behind him. "We've never met in person, but I know you. And I know I've been wrong." Elijah frowned. "I don't need forgiveness." Harrow nodded. "And I didn't come to ask for it." He sat down across from Elijah. He pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. He placed it on the table. "There's a recording in here. An internal meeting between Chief Warren and the members of the Board of Control. They were discussing how to deal with you, Brady, and how to use a fake news leak to turn public opinion around." Elijah stared at the USB drive. "Why did you give it to me?" Harrow was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "Because my son is in 5th grade. And he asked me, 'Have you ever arrested the wrong person?' I couldn't answer." The air was thick. Elijah slowly reached out and took the USB. "How much time do we have before they start firing back?" Harrow replied immediately. "Not much, but enough to knock down the wall if you know where to blow it up." The next morning, live on the Sentinel, a recording went viral nationwide. The plan is to destroy Cross's reputation within 72 hours, make medical accusations, then drag Ward into a financial misconduct investigation, make sure the media never mentions D7 again. If any reporters persist in pursuing the case, call the CDC, make up an infectious disease case, lock down the hospital, muffle the media. Elijah listened to the recording on the cell phone. The cops outside panicked. One peeked into the cell with fear. Harrow stood in the hallway, phone in hand, his eyes cutting through his former teammates. Caroline, upon hearing the part about using Isaac as a tool for empathy, burst into tears during the interview. not because of pain, but because the cruelty had gone too far. That day, a protest spread across Savannah's city square, holding signs. "We are Elijah. No more silence. Justice for Brady. Protect the truth." Thousands of people surrounded the city hall, demanding the release of Elijah Cross, demanding a federal investigation, demanding the redefinition of the entire justice system in the city. In his cell, Elijah looked through a small window, seeing the crowd like waves. A young officer quietly opened the cell door, looked at him, said nothing. Elijah stood up. He knew. Now the real storm began. And this time, the light had the army behind it. That afternoon, amid the scorching sun and the echoes of cheers that echoed through the streets of Savannah, the doors of the federal courthouse opened. Elijah Cross stepped out, his hands still in handcuffs but his head held high. Before him stood thousands of people, old, young, black, white, doctors, students, and those who had been afraid to speak out. They all chanted, "Elijah is not alone. Justice is not handcuffed." Caroline Ward stood beside the legal team, her gray hair tousled but her eyes burning. She was no longer a politician. She was a mother, a citizen, and now a living witness. Harrow appeared at the hearing shortly afterward. No lawyer, no counsel. "Do you know that today's testimony could end your career?" the prosecutor asked. Harrow nodded. "Yes. And you're still ready?" Harrow looked straight into the camera, then replied, "Because sometimes honor is not about how far you climb, but about stopping." He laid out the whole thing. The secret meetings, the fake instructions, the list of police officers specially trained to handle sensitive issues. All were stored, numbered, and sent to the Federal Justice Department itself. That night, Elijah sat next to Isaac in the ICU. The boy was awake, still weak, but his eyes were bright. "Did you really save me?" Isaac asked softly. Elijah smiled, reaching out to squeeze his little hand. "Not just me. You're trying to save this whole city." 3 days later, at a national press conference hosted by the Justice Department, the special investigation's conclusion was announced to the American people. Chief Warren, Remick, and more than a dozen other senior officers were named in the criminal investigation. Brady Nguyen, who has yet to appear, was named a whistleblower and will be protected when he returns. The Savannah Police Department has been placed under special supervision for 18 months. And most notably, a bill called the Isaac Act has been introduced in Congress that would mandatory body cams in all unsupervised areas, prohibit the destruction of internal evidence without an audit, establish independent state boards for medical and judicial integrity. Elijah declined all requests for an exclusive interview. He didn't sign a book deal. He didn't sign a movie deal. Instead, he returned to the hospital and asked for his old job back, an emergency room physician. When a reporter stopped him outside the emergency room and asked, "After all this, do you regret it?" Elijah just smiled. "I only regret not speaking up sooner." At the city's recognition ceremony, Caroline stepped up to the podium, her voice deep and emotional. "I thought I needed to keep quiet to protect my career, but it was my silence that almost killed my nephew. Today, I am no longer a politician. I am a man who has learned that the truth does not need applause. The truth just needs to be told." The hall stood up. The applause was a citywide atonement. That night, Elijah stood on the hospital roof. Savannah was lit up like a starry sky. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, the pledge of silence that Warren had given him to sign in his cell. He burned it. The fire burned. The words disappeared. And he felt lighter, as if he had been stripped of his chains. A little girl walked down the hospital hallway, holding her mother's hand, pointing at Elijah and asking, "Mommy, who is that?" The mother bent down, smiling. "The one who dared to say enough when everyone else was still bowing their heads." And perhaps just one person like that is enough to start it all over again. You have just heard a story that is not a novel. It is not a Hollywood movie. It is a bitter truth that is happening in the heart of America. A black doctor was arrested, humiliated, prevented from doing his job to save lives, just because he had a skin color that they considered dangerous. A child almost lost his life, not because of a lack of medicine, not because of an overcrowded hospital, but because two police officers put their egos above the lives of others. Worse yet, when the truth comes to light, the system does not bow and apologize. It strikes back. It fabricates stories. It tries to silence the person who tells the truth. Elijah Cross is not the only victim. He is just one of thousands of people of color who are stopped every day for looking suspicious. And if he hadn't been a doctor that day, if he hadn't had the reputation, if he hadn't had the mayor's nephew as evidence, he might now be in a black bag with a cold note, resisting law enforcement. Does that sound okay to you? Does it seem like justice exists? Or do you think it's only for those with safe skin colors, allowed status, and clean pasts? This story isn't just for show. It's a warning to all of us. If a doctor can be handcuffed in the middle of the night while saving lives, then you, me, anyone can be next. The truth doesn't exist on its own. It needs people like Elijah. And it needs people like you, standing up, sharing, and not being silent. What? If you're outraged on Elijah's behalf, if you believe a child shouldn't lose his life because of a bad stop, if you want more people to know the truth, like this video now, leave a comment for Elijah, a word of encouragement, a thank you, a quote that says, "I'm with you." And finally, subscribe to receive more real, powerful, and meaningful stories like this, because the truth doesn't tell itself, and those who face the darkness don't stand alone. We're viral stories, and we tell the stories that others want to hide. Thank you for being here. Stay kind, stay for justice, and never let silence prevail.